When your body whispers, lie down, it is rarely about comfort. More often, it is your soul trying to get your attention because the world has taken too much, too fast, for too long. You may think you're tired because you worked hard, but sometimes you're tired because you've been pretending to be okay for too long. There comes a moment in life when you no longer wake up energized, no matter how early you sleep. Your muscles feel heavy, your chest feels tight, and all you want is a bed, not because you're weak, but because your inner world is asking for a pause. This desire to lie down all day is not laziness. It is not failure. It is not you falling behind. It is the silent wisdom of your psyche pulling you inward. You see, the human soul retreats when the noise of life becomes unbearable. When you ignore your emotions, your intuition, your grief, your unspoken hurt, the psyche does something powerful. It slows your body down. It pulls your energy away from the world and directs it back toward your inner self. Your exhaustion is an invitation to finally feel what you've avoided, to finally acknowledge the truths you've pushed away, to finally rest from the role you have been performing, because the soul knows what the mind refuses to accept. You cannot heal while you're rushing. You cannot think clearly while you're drowning. You cannot transform while you're carrying the weight of everyone's expectations, so it forces you to lie down. Fatigue is one of the most misunderstood signals in the human experience. Most people interpret it as a flaw, a failure of discipline, or a lack of willpower. Yet fatigue, in its deepest psychological sense, is rarely about laziness or weakness. It is often the most honest message your inner world is trying to communicate, one that you may have ignored for days, months, or even years. The world teaches you to push, to hustle, to stay active, to keep going, even when every part of your being whispers that something is wrong. You are taught to suppress your natural rhythms, override your emotional needs, and silence your intuition because productivity has become the modern measure of worth. But the body does not follow cultural expectations. It follows truth. And when the truth has been denied for too long, fatigue appears not as a collapse, but as a red flag. Fatigue emerges when your mind has been operating at full capacity, without rest. It shows up when you've been carrying burdens that were never meant to be carried alone. It is the voice of your inner self saying, enough, you cannot continue this way. When you treat fatigue as a weakness, you miss the profound intelligence behind it. The psyche is always communicating, but it does not speak in words. It speaks through sensations, symptoms, and emotional shifts. Fatigue is one of its clearest languages. There are different forms of fatigue, and each one carries its own message. Physical fatigue often signals that your body has reached a limit, whether due to lack of rest, poor nutrition, or excessive strain. Emotional fatigue arises when you spend too much energy managing feelings you haven't expressed, when you suppress disappointment, grief, resentment, or sadness. Mental fatigue occurs when your mind never stops spinning, worrying, planning, or anticipating. Spiritual fatigue appears when you live disconnected from your purpose, your values, your authenticity, or your inner truth. Each form of fatigue is a messenger, and no messenger deserves to be punished for delivering a message. Instead of judging yourself when you feel drained, the healthier response is curiosity. What is this exhaustion trying to tell me? What truth have I ignored? What part of me needs attention, compassion, or change? When you slow down long enough to listen, fatigue becomes a guide rather than an enemy. The modern world makes listening difficult. You are encouraged to stay busy, to distract yourself, to numb the discomfort with entertainment, substances, relationships, or endless scrolling. You are rewarded for staying in motion and punished internally when you pause. But constant motion is not the same as growth, and stillness is not the same as stagnation. Sometimes stillness is the most important movement you can make. Fatigue often arrives as the force that pushes you into that stillness when you would never choose it voluntarily. There is also a deeper layer to understand. Many people experience fatigue not because their life is too heavy, but because their life is not aligned with who they truly are. When you live in roles that drain you, environments that suffocate you, relationships that exhaust you, or routines that do not match your spirit, fatigue increases. The body keeps track. The unconscious keeps score. Eventually, your energy collapses under the weight of living a life that does not feel like your own. Fatigue becomes the soul's protest against self-betrayal. This is why rest alone does not always cure exhaustion. You can sleep 10 hours and still wake up tired, because the issue is not your body, it is your life. You can take breaks and still feel empty because the environment you return to drains you at the root. Fatigue is sometimes a sign that you need physical rest, but more often it is a sign that you need emotional boundaries, mental clarity, or spiritual realignment. When you begin treating fatigue as a message, everything changes. You stop forcing yourself into spaces that drain you. You stop accepting responsibilities that aren't yours. You stop pretending you're fine when you're not. You start creating space for your feelings, your intuition, your needs. You start prioritizing rest as a form of intelligence, not indulgence. You start living with greater honesty about what depletes you and what nourishes you. Fatigue then becomes a teacher, not something to fight, but something to understand. There is a threshold inside every human being, a point where the external world becomes so overwhelming, so chaotic, so demanding, that the inner world begins to retreat. This withdrawal is not a failure of strength, nor is it a sign that you are breaking down. It is a natural psychological response, one that protects the deeper layers of your being from noise that threatens to drown out your truth. When life grows too loud, the soul steps back, quietly and instinctively, seeking refuge in silence. This withdrawal often begins subtly. You may notice a growing desire to avoid conversations, social gatherings, or responsibilities that once felt manageable. You may find yourself zoning out, losing interest in things that used to excite you, or feeling mentally distant even when surrounded by people. These shifts are not random. They are signals that your inner world is overloaded. The psyche has a saturation point, and when overstimulation exceeds that limit, withdrawal becomes a form of self-preservation. The modern world makes this withdrawal almost inevitable. Constant notifications, endless to-do lists, societal pressures, emotional expectations, and the unspoken demand to always be available create a relentless atmosphere. You are expected to respond immediately, work continuously, and remain emotionally stable despite constant stress. The noise isn't only external, it infiltrates your thoughts, your emotions, your nervous system. The soul, however, is not designed for perpetual noise. It thrives in depth, not chaos, in meaning, not distraction, in reflection, not interruption. So when the world becomes too loud, the soul retreats inward, not because it is weak, but because it is wise. It understands that clarity is born in silence. It knows that intuition cannot speak when drowned out by noise. It recognizes that healing requires stillness. The withdrawal is the psyche's attempt to reclaim the inner space that has been invaded by the external demands of life. This retreat can feel confusing or even frightening. You may wonder why you suddenly lack motivation or why you feel emotionally numb. You may worry that you are losing yourself when in reality you are being pulled back to yourself. The soul withdraws not to disconnect, but to reconnect, to gather strength, to reorganize your inner world, to help you remember who you are beneath all the noise. Many people interpret this withdrawal as depression or burnout, and sometimes those are part of the picture. But the deeper truth is that your inner world is overwhelmed. You have been giving too much attention to everything outside of you, other people's needs, expectations, opinions, judgments. You have been carrying responsibilities that drain you, absorbing emotional noise that exhausts you, and pushing yourself through routines that suffocate your spirit. The withdrawal is your soul's request to step out of the storm. When you ignore this retreat, the symptoms intensify. Anxiety rises, concentration fades, emotional responses become unpredictable, sleep becomes restless, the body tightens, the mind races, and the heart grows heavy. These reactions are part of the soul's protective mechanism, urging you to turn inward, to stop forcing yourself into environments that disrupt your inner equilibrium. Withdrawal is not apathy, it is a recalibration. It is the psyche reorganizing itself after being overstimulated for too long. It is the soul creating space to process your emotions, your memories, your disappointments, and your unspoken grief. Without this inward movement, those unresolved experiences would remain buried, creating deeper chaos within. The soul withdraws so that healing can begin in a place undisturbed by noise. In this quiet space, the truths you've avoided start to surface. You may realize that certain relationships drain you more than they nourish you. You may recognize that your routine lacks meaning. You may see that you've been living according to expectations that do not belong to you. You may feel the weight of suppressed emotions that never had permission to be released. The soul's withdrawal exposes these truths not to cause pain, but to bring clarity. Honor this retreat. Do not force yourself to stay in the noise simply because the world expects you to. The soul's withdrawal is a reminder that your inner world needs attention. It asks you to spend time in silence, to reflect, to breathe, to release, to feel, to rediscover your center. In this silence, intuition awakens, creativity resurfaces, emotional balance returns, and clarity emerges not as something you chase, but as something that rises naturally from within. The soul withdraws when life becomes too loud because silence is where it finds its voice. Rest is often misunderstood as something passive, unproductive, or optional. In a world that glorifies constant movement, uninterrupted work, and endless striving, rest is treated almost like a luxury rather than a necessity. Yet rest is not an escape from life. It is an entry point into the deeper layers of it. Rest is a doorway into the unconscious, a portal to clarity, healing, and profound self-realization. The moment you stop moving, truly stop, everything you've been suppressing has a chance to rise to the surface. In stillness, you become aware of the emotions you ignored, the thoughts you pushed away, the dreams you postponed, and the fatigue you pretended didn't exist. Rest gives you access to truths that busyness successfully hides. When you rest, you meet yourself without filters, without performance, without distraction. Much of what people call productivity is actually avoidance. They stay busy to avoid feeling empty. They keep moving to avoid confronting unresolved emotions. They overload themselves with tasks so they don't have to face the deeper questions of their lives. Am I happy? Is this path truly mine? Am I living in alignment with my values? In this way, rest becomes more than stillness. It becomes a mirror, and sometimes what you see in the mirror changes everything. Rest is also where the psyche integrates experience. Every conversation, conflict, memory, stressor, or moment of pressure leaves a trace. When you never slow down, those traces pile up until your inner world becomes cluttered and disorganized. Rest is the cleaning process, the sorting, the healing, the reorganizing. It is the moment when the unconscious absorbs, reshapes, and transforms your experiences into wisdom. Without rest, you accumulate life, but you never digest it. There is a reason clarity often arrives after sleep, why solutions come to mind in the shower, why important insights appear during a walk, or why your intuition becomes louder when you're away from noise. Rest quiets the conscious mind and gives space for deeper layers of intelligence to emerge. When the surface becomes still, the depths can finally speak. Rest is not the absence of activity, it is the presence of inner movement. Many people fear rest because it confronts them with themselves. In rest, there is no performance, no audience, no expectation. There is only you and the truth you carry. For some, this truth is uncomfortable. It reveals suppressed desires, unresolved pain, neglected dreams, or patterns that need breaking. But this discomfort is not a punishment. It is the first step towards self-realization. You cannot truly know yourself while living in constant motion. You learn who you are when you pause long enough to listen. Rest is also an act of reclaiming your power from a world that constantly tries to pull it away. When you rest, you detach from the pressure to meet every expectation, respond to every demand, and carry every responsibility. You create a boundary between your true self and the roles you perform. In that boundary, you reconnect with your essence, your needs, your emotions, your intuition, your identity. Rest reminds you that you are a human being before you are anything else. There is a sacredness in rest that goes beyond physical recovery. Rest is where creativity is born, where intuition awakens, where insight deepens. It is the birthplace of new ideas, new strengths, new perspectives. When you allow yourself to rest without guilt, you create the inner space needed for transformation. You give your mind the chance to untangle itself, your emotions the chance to settle, and your soul the chance to breathe. Think of rest as a portal, one that opens only when you stop forcing yourself to remain in the external world. Through this portal, you gain access to parts of yourself that usually remain hidden, your buried feelings, your authentic desires, your forgotten dreams, your unexpressed truths. These parts hold the blueprint of who you really are. When you rest, you travel inward through that portal, and what you discover changes how you live, how you think, how you choose. To rest is to step into a deeper dimension of yourself. It is where your soul reorganizes your inner world, where your mind finds clarity, where your emotions find release, and where your spirit finds alignment. Rest opens the doorway not just to healing, but to understanding yourself in ways you cannot access while you are busy, distracted, or overwhelmed. The human body is far more than a physical vessel. It is an expressive instrument, constantly communicating truths that the mind may refuse to acknowledge. When the unconscious cannot speak through thoughts or words, it speaks through the body. It uses tension, fatigue, pain, illness, and even posture as symbolic messages. The body becomes the medium through which your deepest, often hidden experiences reveal themselves. Most people interpret physical discomfort solely as a biological issue. They treat the symptom, silence the pain, or distract themselves from discomfort without asking the most important question. What is my body trying to tell me? The body does not create sensations randomly. Every ache, heaviness, tightness, and burst of energy carries emotional or psychological significance. The unconscious does not know how to lie. Its language is physical, direct, and deeply honest. Think of how your body reacts to stress. Your muscles tighten, your breath shortens, your heart rate increases. These reactions are not decisions you consciously make. They arise from the inner self. The body responds before the mind even has time to interpret the situation. This immediate reaction shows how intimately your physical and unconscious selves are connected. The body responds to truth faster than thought. Consider emotional suppression. When you swallow anger instead of expressing it, your body stores the tension. When you deny sadness, your chest becomes heavy. When you ignore fear, your stomach churns. When you pretend to be strong while breaking inside, your whole body feels like it is carrying invisible weight. These sensations are not defects, they are expressions of unprocessed emotion. The body is the canvas on which the unconscious paints what the mind refuses to see. Fatigue often appears when you are emotionally overwhelmed. Anxiety manifests as restlessness or tightness. Unspoken resentment becomes jaw tension or headaches. A lack of boundaries shows up as back pain, as though you are physically carrying burdens that aren't yours. When you feel unsafe, your shoulders rise protectively. When you feel unsupported, your legs weaken. When you feel unheard, your throat tightens. The body reveals what the psyche suppresses. This is why physical healing is never complete without emotional and psychological understanding. You can treat symptoms, but until you understand the message behind them, they will return in one form or another. The body repeats the message until the conscious mind listens. Pain becomes a signal, not a punishment. Discomfort becomes a guide. Each sensation is a clue pointing toward a deeper truth. The unconscious stores memories that the mind has forgotten or pushed away. Traumatic experiences, unresolved conflicts, childhood wounds, and unmet emotional needs often become embedded in the body. These experiences shape your posture, your breathing patterns, your tone of voice, your facial expressions, and even your gait. When you stand rigid, it may reflect years of self-protection. When you collapse inward, it may reveal old emotional wounds. The unconscious speaks through the body long before it speaks through thoughts. This connection explains why certain physical sensations appear during moments of emotional clarity. When you finally release a long-held emotion, your shoulders relax. When you speak a difficult truth, your throat clears. When you set a boundary, your chest expands. When you walk away from something that drains you, your steps become lighter. The body responds instantly to alignment and authenticity, just as it reacts to suppression and denial. Listening to your body requires awareness, patience, and honesty. Instead of numbing discomfort, observe it. Instead of dismissing pain, question it. Instead of criticizing your fatigue, explore it. Ask yourself, what emotion is this sensation connected to? What situation triggers it? What truth am I avoiding that my body is trying to reveal? When you approach the body with curiosity instead of judgment, you begin to understand its language. Your body is not against you. It is not your enemy, and it is not betraying you. It is your most loyal communicator. It expresses what your conscious mind overlooks, forgets, or denies. It protects you by revealing imbalance before it becomes crisis. It warns you when you are disconnecting from your authentic self. It nudges you back toward emotional and psychological alignment. To understand your body is to understand your unconscious. To respect your body is to respect the deeper truths within you. When you listen to the body's messages, you begin to uncover hidden emotions, unmet needs, and unspoken truths. You start living with more awareness, more honesty, and more inner harmony. There are moments in life when you feel an unexpected heaviness, a strange sense of distance from the world, or a sudden shift in energy that you can't easily explain. You may find yourself withdrawing from people, losing motivation for things you once enjoyed, or craving solitude in a way that feels unfamiliar. While these experiences can seem confusing or even unsettling, they often point to something profound happening beneath the surface. You are being pulled back to yourself. This inner pull usually begins quietly. It starts as a subtle discomfort with situations that once felt normal. You might notice that certain conversations drain you more than before, certain environments feel overwhelming, or certain responsibilities no longer align with your spirit. These signs are not random, they are invitations. They indicate that some deeper part of you, long ignored or suppressed, is trying to rise again. The human psyche has a natural way of guiding you toward authenticity. When you drift too far from who you are, when you live according to expectations, roles, or demands that distort your truth, the inner self begins sending signals. These signals often show up as emotional fatigue, dissatisfaction, irritability, or a growing desire to step away from the noise of everyday life. What feels like a decline is often the first stage of realignment. Being pulled back to yourself is not always pleasant. In fact, it usually begins with discomfort. You start feeling the consequences of ignoring your own needs. You become aware of the weight of pretending, performing, or pleasing. You feel the strain of carrying responsibilities that are not yours. This discomfort is not punishment, it is awakening. It reveals where you have abandoned yourself in order to fit in, survive, or be accepted. When the soul initiates this pull, it often disrupts your routines. You may lose interest in the life you built around external validation. You may become less tolerant of superficial interactions or shallow commitments. You may feel an urge to simplify your life, disconnect from certain people, or spend more time alone. This withdrawal is not regression, it is recalibration. It is the psyche creating space for your true self to re-emerge. During this process, you might feel lost or uncertain. You may not immediately know what you want or where you are headed. This confusion itself is part of the pull because the mind must let go of old identities before new clarity can surface. When you no longer fit the roles you once played, it is natural to feel unanchored. But this unanchoring is necessary for transformation. You cannot return to yourself while clinging to a version of you that no longer feels alive. Being pulled back to yourself means remembering the parts of you that were neglected. It means reconnecting with your intuition, your creativity, your inner wisdom. It means acknowledging the emotions you suppressed for the sake of peace. It means allowing the desires you buried to resurface. It means listening to your inner voice, even when it contradicts what others expect from you. Authenticity always begins with internal honesty. This pull also reveals the importance of boundaries. The more you return to yourself, the more clearly you see what drains you and what nourishes you. You begin to recognize which relationships support your growth and which ones restrict it. You understand what responsibilities are truly yours and which ones you took on out of guilt or fear. The pull back to yourself forces you to choose alignment over approval, peace over performance, self-respect over self-sacrifice. In this process, solitude becomes sacred. Time alone allows your mind to quiet, your emotions to settle, and your intuition to speak. Solitude helps you separate external noise from internal truth. It is in this stillness that you can finally hear what you have been unconsciously longing for. What seems like withdrawal is actually reconnection. What feels like isolation is often the clearing of space for self-discovery. As you return to yourself, you begin to feel lighter, clearer, and more grounded. You start making choices from a place of inner knowing rather than fear or pressure. You rediscover passions that once brought you joy. You reconnect with values that truly matter to you. You learn to trust yourself again. This inner alignment becomes the foundation for a life that feels meaningful rather than performative. Being pulled back to yourself is the psyche's way of reminding you that you cannot live in contradiction forever. You cannot continue abandoning your truth without losing your vitality. You cannot silence your inner voice without eventually losing your direction. The pull is a form of protection. It brings you back to authenticity, back to wholeness, back to the life your soul recognizes as its own.